Division agents Caleb Dunne and Heather Ward have been tracking a woman known as Mantis all the way from New York to Maryland. Enlisting the help of Agent Brian Johnson, they are finally able to bring the fight to her front door. However, they soon find themselves at the heart of something much larger than what they had expected, and this event triggers something that leads them directly to Washington, D.C. Like a number of kids growing up in Santa Cruz, Brian Johnson began surfing at a very early age, and because of his natural talents, was well set on his way to going pro. However, the consequence of a bad breakup had him making a rash decision, and he decided to enlist in the Navy. There he discovered something that drove him to want to push himself even further than he would have ever imagined, and so he joined the police department in Baltimore, and later became a sniper within their quick response team. Along the way he was recruited by the Strategic Homeland Division, and during the early days of the outbreak, he spent a lot of his time trying to combat the growing crisis around him, all while witnessing a number of his friends succumb to the disease. During this time, Brian saw many things that deeply and emotionally scarred him, and had a very hard time processing that trauma, and still is. The early days of the outbreak were the hardest days for Brian. All of his friends, especially within the Baltimore Police Department, had died. So he had made his way alone to Fort Meade, where he would help defend the government facility, all the while trying to forget the terrible things he had witnessed. Baltimore had become a war zone. Decades of built-up rage and frustration finally exploded, and was only further fueled by the green poison. Dunne and Heather approach a compound. Outside the barricade they see an agent overseeing the perimeter. His name is Brian Johnson. Introducing themselves, they explain to him that they have something in their possession that needs decrypting. They have fought many battles on the road to this location, and although it's nice to finally see another friendly face, they don't know enough about this person to share just yet the exact reasons why they're here. Brian understands that this is a need-to-know situation, and therefore proceeds to take them to the compound and directly to the person in charge of the facility. Once in front of the deputy director, Dunne and Heather disclose everything they have witnessed. They reveal their information on Mantis and what they had found at her office at the water treatment facility. They also inform the deputy director of the two hostile groups Mantis has been supplying weapons and technology to, and express their brief that it is for the sole purpose of distraction and keeping the division busy. The deputy director wasn't overly convinced by this story, as over the months they've been dealing with a large influx of conspiracy theories, and to her this sounded just as crazy as some of the others. However, after having a look at the radio hardware they had acquired, she agreed to have one of their teams work on it. The tech personnel said it would be at least a week before they were able to get any answers. They make a start on it, but for now, Dunne and Heather are being forced to have a bit of a break. Brian has been defending this vital government installation for the last few months, and although no one would dare question his devotion, there has been very little in the way of hostile activity around these parts. Along with the boredom, Brian has had plenty of time to reflect. This time has been good for him, to get to grips with what he saw in the early days following the outbreak, and with the introduction of these two agents from New York and Philadelphia, he has been brought back to reality with what is currently happening out there in the world. He notices how these two agents are quite an odd duo. Dunne seems to be struggling with some memories of his past, where Heather appears far more optimistic and positive around the current situation. Yet they have come together to put a stop to a grave threat that is far bigger than their own problems. Brian has been consumed by what he witnessed after the release of the green poison, but he is now ready to face who he is and get going on the job that he swore to do as a division agent. By now he was fully briefed on Mantis and understands the full scale of this new threat. When the techies have finished their job, he'll be joining Dunne and Heather on their journey. Eventually the hardware team crack the device and provide them with a means to track the signal. It leads them west towards Frederick. What would have been an hour's drive before the outbreak is now a number of days' walk, and although urgency is a concern, the road is dangerous and caution is required. They track the signal to a farm. Running some recon on the property beforehand, they immediately notice the fresh tyre tracks outside. petrol is incredibly difficult to come by these days. This only further supports their suspicion of it being a part of something much bigger. Crouched out of sight, they survey the farmhouse. Brian suggests that they get some support from the JTF close by at Fort Detrick, though as he suspected, Brian isn't willing to wait, at risk of losing Mantis again. So they make a plan to advance on the house, to get in range of Isaac's scanners, to see if any hostiles are picked up. Brian and Dunne move towards the house, while Heather flanks around the side towards the barn. In the farmhouse, the security system picks up on the unknown movement from outside. Soldiers dressed in black suddenly appear from the house and open fire on Dunne and Brian. Isaac still hasn't picked them up. They must be using something to block its scanners. Meanwhile, Heather has made her way into the barn. Parked in the middle is a military-grade Humvee. Over the gunfight happening outside, Heather hears the creak of a door, followed quickly by a shower of bullets. She manages to duck into cover and radios through to Dunne and Brian, signaling that she has a visual on Mantis. Mantis jumps into the Humvee and speeds out of the barn in Brian and Dunne's direction. But before she is able to make it very far, Heather rushes out from the barn. Using a grenade launcher, she manages to attach a remote detonation device onto the back of the vehicle. The Humvee is blown forward and on top of its roof. With flames billowing out from the underside, the three agents cautiously approach the wreckage. Suddenly, the side door pops open. Firing a burst of rounds, she runs, while the agents hit the ground. Brian returns fire, and Dunne takes off after her. Injured from the crash, it doesn't take long for Dunne to catch up to Mantis. He tackles her to the ground, and after a short fight, he finds himself in a situation where he could end her once and for all. All the built-up rage and vengeance has led him to this point, where he could simply kill her where they stand, and avenge the loss of his friend that she brutally murdered in front of him. But with Heather pleading for him not to do it, he finally came to the realization that this wasn't him. This wasn't what he signed up to do, and that killing her won't fix the grief that he is feeling. Throwing her to the ground, Dunne takes a few steps back while Heather cuffs her. But it isn't over. Suddenly, all agents notice their watches have gone dead, and that the connection to the SHD network has been cut off. Lifting Mantis to her feet, it's obvious that her people were responsible for this. But before they could start questioning her, there is a huge explosion. They could see the smoke in the distance, rising above the tree line. It was Fort Detrick. Making their way towards the location, they can see the sheer devastation that has been unleashed. Fort Detrick is a part of the Biological Defense Program. The Army Medical Command was stationed here. This organization had even greater resources than they had originally thought, and that they had timed this attack perfectly with the crash of the division network. How far widespread were these attacks? What was left in New York, Philadelphia, Washington DC? This was an attack on the United States, but with their communications down, they had no idea where they were needed. But before they could discuss this further, they heard the sudden crack of a bullet hitting its target. Mantis had been shot. Before she'd even hit the ground, the three agents had found cover. The shot had come from a marksman rifle, around 800 yards away. But it was obvious that this was meant for Mantis, likely in an attempt to silence her before they were able to extract any information. Dunne, Heather, and Brian discuss what to do next. With the SHD network down, they're sitting ducks, but they have no idea what the cause of it was and where to go. All they currently have to work with is some coordinates that their watches are showing. This would be their first stop for answers. The three agents spend the next 2 weeks travelling on foot. The coordinates led them to the nation's capital, Washington DC. The backup protocol for when Isaac goes down is for all agents to be called to DC, so they have no idea what they're about to walk into. All they know is that they are the division, the country's last line of defense, the last stand. And that concludes the Extremis Smeller series. I absolutely love how this lines up with the beginning of the Division 2, sort of a mini prequel to the story, giving us a bit more background on Mantis and the Black Tusk before their full invasion. Again, and I know I've said this in all 3 videos, but credit where credit is due and all that. This has been part 3 of the Division comic book series that came out at the beginning of the Division 2. You can find these on darkhorse.com. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you've enjoyed these, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers!